space for conversation around women's health through the lens of naturopathic and Eastern medicine. I am Sandy Ross, and this is her Earth Medicine Podcast. This podcast is multi-leveled. Episodes for patient education to graduate practitioner level. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you gain value from this episode. Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Amie Skilton, who is a functional medicine practitioner of almost 20 years. Amie is a very well-known and respected educator in the naturopathic medicine world. For over 15 years, she has graced conference stages, TV sets, and in recent times, laptop screens via Zoom. And in that time, she has presented more than 1,000 keynotes to functional medicine practitioners, integrative GPs, holistic pharmacists, and the general public. In 2017, after developing an environmentally acquired illness, SIRS, she discovered the world of building biology and the various ways in which the build environment has a profound impact on human health. She realised her naturopathic, nutritional and herbal medicine toolkit were only as useful as the environment that was healthy. She's now on a mission to raise awareness in the public arena and educate practitioners on commonly overlooked but monumentally significant influences on our health and well-being, such as mold and EMFs. So in this podcast, we're diving into all things EMF, and let's welcome Amie to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Amie.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for taking the time out to join us and to inform our listeners about this topic, because it's something that I think people are becoming aware of, but there's not much out there for resources for patients and practitioners. So I'm super excited to dive into this topic. But before we do, would you mind sharing us a little bit about yourself and how you became a building biologist?
So I am a naturopath, nutritionist and herbalist, and I started working in this profession almost 20 years ago now and love it. And one of the things that we do really well is finding the root cause of someone's problems, or the root causes. And that's something that our training is very comprehensive on, but 3 years ago, I got really, really, really sick from an environmentally acquired illness. And that for me was a big wake-up call about the blind spot in functional medicine as far as some of the root causes to our patients' ill health actually being hidden in their homes. And for me in particular, that was mold related, but that's what got me started on the building biology world. I'm still training to be a building biologist, but I've completed mold testing certification and EMF testing certification. And so at the moment, I'm really raising awareness about those two things, because they are two of the most significant sources of ill health in someone's home. And they are something that we have almost complete control over as well, which means as a risk factor, as far as your health goes, it's a modifiable one. And so what I'm really passionate about at the moment is raising that awareness for clinicians as well as for the general public, so that people can start making changes in their home and making their home more of a supportive healing space, and not one that's negatively impacting their health.
That's great. I love the way you educate. I've done a few of your webinars now, and I find you so informative. And I love that you give a lot of the research. You really back up with what you're saying too, which I think is really important for a lot of us, especially the people with a science background, to understand. So shall we dive in and actually talk, what are EMFs?
Yes, okay. So this is a really big subject, and it is one that can be really tricky for people to get their heads around, because under the label of EMFs, or electromagnetic frequencies, or electromagnetic energy, or electromagnetic radiation, there's a lot of different categories. And I guess to sort of give some context, if you look at like a really overarching view, we've got two loose categories, one ionizing radiation and one non-ionizing radiation. So ionizing radiation is probably the things that people think about when they hear the word radiation, and that is, nuclear energy, Chernobyl, Hiroshima, X-rays. People know now that those things are problematic to our health, and that's why radiographers now stand behind lead-lined walls when they take your X-ray. And we really try and minimise people's exposure because they are such high frequencies and therefore have very high energy and can be very damaging to our cellular structures. So because ionizing radiation is so powerful, everything that's non-ionizing has been kind of lumped into this catch-all basket and is generally considered fairly harmless, if not completely harmless. And unfortunately, that's not true, and that is not what the literature says either. And so under non-ionizing radiation, which is the space that I work in, we have sort of 6 main categories, but there are 4 primary categories in someone's home that they should be aware of. So we have probably the most obvious one, and I say that though it may not be obvious for everyone, is wireless radiation. And that is the emissions coming off your cell phone, off your modem, any of your smart devices. And if you live within 400 metres of a cell phone tower, that's also the kind of EMFs that you'll be getting exposed to. If you're near an airport, for instance, you might be being exposed to things like radar. If you're near, say, a fire station or an ambulance headquarters, you might also have other telecommunications stuff. Anything that works wirelessly is emitting wireless radiation. So that also includes Bluetooth speakers and Bluetooth headphones, things like that, wireless cordless phones. In addition to that, though, there are several other types of EMFs in your home that perhaps are less obvious. One is electric fields and the other is magnetic fields. And these are present wherever electricity is present, and that's electric fields. And when electricity is moving through wiring or being used by an appliance, we see magnetic fields. The other one that really impacts people's health is artificial light. Now, I think a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of blue light, and really what that is a particular part of the spectrum of artificial light, which tells our brains that it's daytime when it's actually nighttime. That really messes with our hormones. That being said, all artificial light will have an influence to one degree or another, and that's really upsetting human circadian rhythm, immunochemistry, and a whole lot of other stuff. And so those 4 main categories, when you look at the impact of exposure, there are well-documented health problems with each of those. And so I'm trying to share that information with people in order to motivate them to change their behaviours in their home so that they can lower their risk factors for disease down the line.
Okay, great. So EMFs are found basically anywhere there's some sort of like electricity field, magnetic field, Wi-Fi. So our car would be a big place for it, I assume too.
Yes, so the car is an interesting one because the car is made of metal, and you've got what most of the electricity in a car is direct current, and so the fields don't tend to be too large, although you have to test on a case-by-case basis. For the centre console with the radio and things will have a magnetic field of some description. If you've got under-seat heaters, that will also generate a magnetic field. But with cars these days, with GPS and onboard navigational systems, you've got a wireless component to it as well. And because the car is metal, it's almost like driving in a microwave. And also another thing that people often do that's that's really not healthy is making phone calls in a car. Now, whether or not you've got your phone on speakerphone or you're using Bluetooth, you are effectively getting more wireless radiation exposure than if you were outside the car standing still, because not only have you got those frequencies bouncing around in the car being amplified, but when your phone is constantly having to search for the nearest base station, it emits a lot more radiation. And in fact, here's a tip. I'm just going to throw one out here right now. First of all, don't make phone calls in your car and keep your phone in flight mode and avoid using, the satellite navigation unless you absolutely have to. But you should never use your cell phone unless you have full bars of reception. If you're trying to use your phone in a low reception area, tests have shown the phone can emit up to 10,000 more times wireless radiation in an attempt to get a signal than if you've got full coverage. So be very mindful of that. If you're, trying to make a phone call and you're in a building or you're somewhere with poor coverage, if it can wait, please leave it till you've got better reception.
Okay, well, I make pretty much all my phone calls in the car, so there's something I need to change straight away, and I'm sure a lot of people do, especially mums. It's so convenient, hands-free.
I know.
Can I please ask, what are the health implications of EMFs, like at a cellular level?
So there's already a significant body of literature that shows a number of fundamental mechanisms in our physiology that get disrupted from various types of EMFs. Now, because there are different types of EMFs, some you have to look at them in the context of the type of EMF. But if I was just to say generally, we know that it interrupts voltage-gated calcium channels, which, if you don't know what they are, I want you to think about them a little bit like an electric garage door. You can hit a button, it opens up, things can come into the garage, things can go out, and then you hit the button and it closes. And it regulates calcium status inside the cell. Because it excites these protein gateways, it actually causes excessive calcium to flood the cell, which can wreak havoc across the board with its functioning, including its antioxidant status. We also know that it causes lipid peroxidation, which means it damages any fatty tissues in the body, which includes every single cell membrane that you have, but particularly your nervous system that's coated with a fatty myelin sheath. We can see a lot of nervous system damage occur because of that. It also triggers histamine release, and that can be a problem for people who struggle to metabolize histamine or have allergies, or it can set people up for mast cell activation syndrome. But lastly, and probably most importantly, it increases our risk for cancer and autoimmune conditions and inflammatory conditions, because it reduces our antioxidant status. In particular, it lowers our melatonin levels, which of course wrecks the quality and quantity of our sleep. But melatonin is our most powerful anti-cancer compound that we have. But in addition to that, it also causes DNA, single and double-stranded DNA damage. And herein lies why people have assumed that non-ionizing radiation is safe. Because ionizing radiation causes DNA damage instantly, and non-ionizing radiation takes a little bit longer to cause that damage, the assumption has been it's safe, when in fact we know now it's not. It causes massive amounts of free radical production of things like peroxynitrite inside the nucleus of our cells, which is where our DNA genetic blueprint lies, and damages that blueprint and therefore genetic expression downstream. And so the outcomes of that, as you can probably extrapolate, are huge. We see mood changes for people, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, ADHD, irritability, trouble with focus and memory. We see nervous system damage. I think about 23% of electrically sensitive people have autoantibodies to the myelin sheath.
Wow.
We also see in people with EHS a blood marker for damage to the blood-brain barrier, which we know to have significant consequences. We see other markers for lipid peroxidation and free radical damage. And ultimately, when you start drilling down into the literature, we see all kinds of things from headaches, paresthesias, tinnitus, cancer, autoimmune conditions. We know EMFs change our microbiome, and knowing that the gut is the tube of life and the axis of everything, that one fact alone means EMFs can impact every single part of our body, even if those other physiological mechanisms weren't there. So suffice to say, whether or not you experience electro-hypersensitivity that you recognise or not, EMFs are doing damage to your cellular biology and to your DNA, and it's only a matter of time. You need to think about it like smoking or asbestos. There's a latency period there, and it's cumulative. And so is there a difference, to use an analogy, between someone who only smokes one cigarette a day versus someone who smokes a pack a day? Sure, of course there is. The person who smokes very heavily is going to get much sicker much quicker, and you'll be able to measure those issues much sooner. But does that mean smoking one cigarette a day is perfectly safe? Obviously not. And the lower we can make our exposure, the better our health is going to be. Now, nothing is perfect. We're inhaling chemicals all the time. I don't even eat organic 100% of the time. We can just do our very best. But if you can reduce your exposure by 95%, why wouldn't you? Especially if you plan on living a normal human lifespan. We want you to have a quality of life, not just a quantity, of a certain number. And reducing toxic health hazards in your home is really your point of power, because even if you're renting, you have a lot of control over your immediate environment and what happens in it. And therefore, you can reduce your exposure to things that are bad for you in quite a significant way with some very simple changes, if I may say so myself.
Wow, okay. A lot of information to take on there, but can I ask, you mentioned a few symptoms that people can experience if they are sensitive, and also, may I ask, who is most at risk?
So let's talk about who's most at risk first. First of all, if you have a job or an occupational profession where you're on your phone a lot, or you're using wireless radiation to connect your devices to the internet, your exposure is a lot higher than someone who, say, is a gardener or someone who's not working on electronic devices all the time. That being said, if you're in good health, your risk of developing EHS is lower in the sense that it will take longer than if someone is dealing with health issues. So if you are unwell, you have a chronic illness, you have an inflammatory illness, you have an autoimmune condition, you have genetic vulnerabilities, or you have other body burdens, which might be chemical in nature if you've had a chemical exposure. They might be physical in nature if you've had a brain injury, so if you've ever had a concussion, or if you've ever had general anaesthetic. These things also put you at an increased risk. And of course, if you're on multiple medications, or you're being exposed to other chemicals or other toxins, your body's already labouring under the weight of other health hazards. And so when you put something like EMFs on top, the resilience and ability to withstand it is just nowhere near as strong as someone who's in otherwise great health. So everyone's at risk of developing health conditions from EMFs, but you are much more likely to experience symptoms of EMF sensitivity a lot quicker if you have any of those risk factors. And for many people, they have more than one of those as well. And knowing, it's 2021 now, pretty much everyone's running their lives on the internet. Everyone's had a Zoom call last year for something. We're now sort of, engaging with technology in a much closer way. and will probably continue to do so into the future. So knowing how to do that in a more safer way is really, really important.
Definitely.
Now, as far as EMF sensitivity symptoms go, there's a lot. I might even bring up a little list so I can run people through that and I don't forget anything.
Okay,
but what I might do is start with the symptoms I get. So I developed electrohypersensitivity. I would consider it to be very mild. It almost doesn't affect me at all in day-to-day life. But I have to watch how much time I spend on my phone if it's not hardwired. This developed the same year that I got mold illness, or SIRS, which, for anyone who doesn't know what that is a condition you can develop as a result of exposure to toxigenic molds and water damage, and it causes a really big inflammatory reaction in the body. So my body was already being poisoned by mold toxins and my immune system was going bananas. So my body was in a pretty bad state. And so the first symptom I noticed, I had, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that much back then, 3 years ago. I would run my laptop off Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi modem was probably, it was on another room and through a concrete wall, but it was probably only 3 meters from me, maybe 4. I would also have my cell phone sitting propped up next to my laptop, and I also had a cordless phone right next to that. So I had like 3 wireless devices, like 1.5 feet away from my skull. And my nose started going numb and my face would start going numb once I'd sat at my desk for a few hours. And when I became really sick and couldn't work and was sort of stuck in bed a lot, I would often be on my phone. That was sort of my connection to the outside world. And if I was sort of on my phone, I don't know, whether I was researching something, reading something on the internet, scrolling the gram, an hour or so into it, I would start to get symptoms, and there was sort of 3 distinct symptoms on top of that kind of numbness in the face and the hand. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed their hand goes a little bit funky after holding their phone all the time.
Yeah.
But I would get like a funny headache, and it wasn't like any other headache that I have had before. It's like a brain ache, like the organ inside my skull is like achy. I would also get heart palpitations, so I could feel flutters in my chest, and I would also feel a bit ill. It wasn't as extreme as, say, food poisoning or what morning sickness would feel like, where you're feeling nauseous and wanting to vomit, but it's kind of like a mild version of that. And it took me a while to work out it was the radiation from my phone. But anyway, that still happens to me now if I'm being naughty and scrolling on my phone using a wireless connection, which I avoid for the most part by using a hardwired connection. But the symptoms of EMF sensitivity can be much broader than that. That's what I think are probably the most common for mild symptoms for people. If I keep pushing through that, I'll feel a bit anxious. But here's what people report. 88% of people who experience EMF sensitivity get headaches. Like I said, for me, it was quite a distinctive headache that was unlike other ones, and I now know if I get it, that it's EMF-based. Dysesthesia is also quite common. 82% of people experience that. For anyone who's not heard that word before, it's like an abnormal sensation in your skin. For me, it was numbness, but it might be burning sensation, prickling sensation, tickling sensation, or an ache. Muscle pains in 48% of sufferers, joint pains in 30%, feeling like your ear is hot or sore. Now, that would be more common for people who actually talk with their cell phones against their ears. Now, for the love of all things health, if you're listening to this and you do that, stop that immediately. Don't ever do it again. Put your phone on speakerphone or use air tubes, which are a wired headset where the wire doesn't come all the way up into your ear. Tinnitus is common. 60% of people get that. 40% of people end up with very sensitive ears and noises are really quite impactful for them. Dizziness in 70% of patients. I can say when I get the headache, I also feel a little bit wobbly. Troubles with balance and 42%, issues with attention and 76%, memory 70%, and fatigue and insomnia are also really common. And how common are those symptoms today?
Yeah.
In everybody. Now, I'm not saying that, this is the cause of everyone's problems. However, it's a really big factor, even if there are other root causes. Now, things like depression, anxiety, irritability, emotional volatility, suicidal ideation are also quite prevalent. And another one, which is quite interesting, is global body dysthermia, which is when someone has trouble regulating their temperature. So, the hot, the cold, and they seem to be really out of alignment with the environment and other people in it. So everyone else might feel fine, but they're like freezing, or they're overheating and they're like, aren't you hot? It's so hot in here. Or I'm so cold. Can't we, turn the aircon, a little warmer? And because of the way it impacts the hypothalamus, we can't actually regulate our temperature that well. And of course, with the histamine, that feeds into it as well. So there's a lot of symptoms that can be caused by EMF exposure.
It's 2021 and everyone has a laptop, a phone. They're charging their phone next to them at night, earpods in their ear. So if someone is going, oh, yeah, I tick the box for many of those symptoms, how can they mitigate it to try and identify if it is electromagnetic hypersensitivity? Would you suggest cold turkey from everything and go outside and ground and see if you feel better that way? Because a lot of people would say, well, causation isn't correlation, but it's, I guess, you've got to do cold turkey to identify it, right?
Well, it's a little bit like chemical poisoning. Just removing the chemical doesn't necessarily make you instantly better, although it can. People can notice an immediate difference. I think regardless, people should be doing better by their health. It's like saying, maybe you should eat healthy for a week and see if you feel better, and if you don't, just go back to eating junk food your whole life. It is a known health hazard, and regardless of whether it's the ultimate cause or part of the problem, you are not going to be able to heal properly from whatever you're dealing with if you are damaging your body with non-ionizing radiation. So without question, you should be looking to improve how you use technology in a safer way. With electric and magnetic fields, there's a lot of things you can do that we probably can't get into here because it's a bit individual, but probably the biggest thing with magnetic fields is never sit, stand, or sleep near electrical appliances. Now, this might sound like a silly thing to say, but here's what I mean. If you're in the kitchen cooking, and especially if you have an induction stovetop, those things give off really high magnetic fields. Don't stand there casually, probably scrolling on your phone, let's be honest, while you're waiting for the damn thing to boil or stir fry or whatever. Don't stand next to it. Don't stand next to the oven. Don't stand next to the fridge. Walk away, come back. Walk away, come back. Don't be sitting on top of a speaker. If some people put their subwoofers under the couch because it's great for like a home movie experience, don't do that. Don't have the speakers right by your ears. But perhaps even more importantly, and I think if you have to prioritize anything, prioritize your immediate environment when you're sleeping and resting. So look at your bedroom. Do not have any electronics near on your bedside table at all, and that includes electronic alarm clocks. If you've got a bedside lamp, unplug it from the wall when you go to sleep.
Even a salt lamp?
Electric blanket. Hey?
Sorry to cut you off there. Even a salt lamp?
Even a salt lamp.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, even a salt lamp. Move it a little bit further away. I mean, unless you have a meter to measure the size of the magnetic field, you need to assume it's at least 1.2 meters based on the the voltage of the power we use here in Australia. Okay. So you want to have really ideally at 2 meters away, but not anywhere in the bedroom. So other end, foot of the bed, other side of the room, and then the things that are going to be proximal to your bed, like a bedside lamp or an electric blanket, unplug when you go to sleep. But perhaps even more importantly, the bigger the appliance, the more electricity it uses, the larger the magnetic field. So if there is a bedroom that abuts up against the kitchen, you do not want the bed head on the wall where the fridge is on the other side, or the oven's on the other side, or the microwave's on the other side. So it's probably easier to move the bed than rearrange the kitchen, so do that. And some people you can't. I had one client who had quite a cozy house, and basically what she had to do was actually reverse how she slept and sleep with her head down the bottom end of the bed so that her head wasn't in this magnetic field all night. Because it's at night that we detoxify, it's at night that our nervous system detoxifies and regenerates. That's when the most healing happens, because we're doing the least with our bodies and brains. And so that is the most important environment to prioritize. That being said, the type of EMF that we're being exposed to in ever-increasing amounts and at ever-increasing higher frequencies is wireless radiation. So if you had to focus on one thing and one thing only, I would say cell phone and modem and any wireless devices in the home. So in a perfect world, you wouldn't have Wi-Fi at home. You would hardwire everything, which is what I do here. So we have internet coming into the premises, and ordinarily what most households would do is they'd have their modem plugged in, emitting a wireless signal throughout the home so all of the devices can connect wirelessly. I run an Ethernet cable instead and use an adapter to plug it into my laptop and into my phone most of the time. Obviously, you can't do that when you've left the house. But, every night when you're sitting on the couch, cruising Facebook, maybe you're shopping on Net-a-Porter, whatever it is you do in your spare time on the internet, you don't need to be holding a wireless device against your belly and your chest while you do that. You can actually switch it into airplane mode and hardwire it. Now that takes a bit of effort. You might need to order some things. You might need a bit of technical support to do that. So in the meantime, at the very, very least, do not sit, stand, or sleep anywhere near a wireless device, including the modem. It shouldn't be in anyone's bedroom. It should be as far away as possible from bedrooms, and ideally not in the living room either. And when the last person goes to bed at night, unplug it from the wall. Now, you might think to turn it off should be enough, or even to flip the power switch off is enough, but I have measured some that continue to stay live and emit a wireless signal even when the switch is flipped to off. And so unless you have bought a meter for the public use and you're testing it, assume it's live unless you've unplugged it. Okay. I have actually seen recently one that had a battery backup that still emitted wireless radiation. But anyway, there's solutions to that too. But for the most part, if you unplug it from the wall, it'll go off. Put all other wireless devices into flight mode and switch them off at night, and do not have them anywhere in the bedrooms either. Now, for anyone who uses their cell phone as an alarm clock, which admittedly I do, I have mine in flight mode, and I make sure, mine's an iPhone, so I make sure everything is off. So the Bluetooth antenna, the cell phone antenna, and the Wi-Fi antenna, so there's no emissions, and I put it at the other side of my bedroom. But if you use something else, like an old-fashioned alarm clock, or you have children, then just keep it out of your bedroom altogether. And that way you lower your wireless exposure really quite dramatically. Just a couple of words of warning with other wireless devices like speakers. Sometimes they can still be running even when they're off. I've got a sound bar that runs off mains power, and even when it's plugged in at the wall and the switch is off, it's still emitting a wireless signal, so I have to pull the cord out. And I know some of the newer wireless speakers have a battery backup, and so a building biologist colleague of mine has to put hers in a stainless steel pot with the lid on because there's just no way of turning it off. So be very careful. There is a big movement towards smart appliances now, wireless entry into your house, wireless, light dimmers, wireless fridges that can tell you what you've run out of. All of these conveniences come at a very high cost. And so I would encourage you on the back of this conversation to think very, very carefully about whether or not that's a good idea for you and your family.
Okay, so step one would be unplug. And go on flight mode as much as possible. Are there timers or something? Because I know a lot of people will unplug in the beginning, but then they might become lazy and forget to do it, or they fall asleep, especially if it's up to the male to unplug at night and they fall asleep on the couch, for example. Are there things we can do to protect our home a little more?
Yeah, look, there's a few things. If you own your own home, you can get a demand switch installed with a timer, which means you cut the electricity off to your whole house, except for the circuits you choose to leave on. So essentially that for most people would just be your kitchen circuit, so your fridge doesn't go off and defrost everything overnight.
Yeah.
If you have a CPAP machine, maybe someone's bedroom's going to need that as well. But if you rent and can't do that, you could definitely get a timer it's like a plug-in timer that you then plug in your devices to. And the first thing I would prioritize is definitely your modem, so that at 10 p.m. at night, when you should have well and truly been off your devices for a good hour and a half at least anyway, the Wi-Fi goes off. And then you can go to bed and not worry about it, and you can have the timer come back on 8 a.m, 7 a.m, whatever it is, when you're going to want to get back on the internet and allow you access. And at least that way, as a bare minimum, you're creating a lower EMF environment as you sleep and rest and regenerate.
Okay, and so with the Wi-Fi box, and say you've got the NBN box as well, do they both need to be switched off?
The NBN box, as I understand it, does not emit a wireless signal, and so that can be left on. It's the modem that's connected to the NBN box that pushes out the wireless signal. You can sometimes turn the wireless signal off on the modem, but that tends to be on older modems. I'm finding the newer ones don't have that option anymore because they think wireless is the bomb.com, so why would you want to turn it off? So yeah, just be careful. That's why I'm saying unplugging it might be best, but you don't have to unplug the NBN box at all.
Okay. One of my concerns is children on devices, and you see this constantly, and I get it, for mothers it's an escape for them to have their own time to get things done, but I think there needs to be limitations. Could you maybe just touch on that? Are there options for kids and devices?
Yes. Okay, so children are 10 times more vulnerable to EMF toxicity than adults. Their cells are thinner, their bones absorb way more radiation, not to mention their neural pathways are still being formed, their nervous system is very vulnerable. And so as dangerous as it is for adults to be exposed to EMFs, we've got to be far more protective of our children. It's probably a whole other subject around getting Wi-Fi's out of school. But here's what I would do. I would hardwire everything for your kids. So hardwire the iPad, hardwire the phone. One of my best friends actually just got her wee daughter her own cell phone. She's not quite 2, and I know that sounds really radical, but children are very drawn to devices. They are wired for addiction. And yes, they give you 5 seconds to go to the toilet or make their lunch before they melt down. So what she's done, and this is very clever, is downloaded her favourite YouTube videos, downloaded her favourite shows and music, and it's in flight mode. There's no SIM connection anyway, but that way she can wander around, she can pretend to make her own phone calls, she can watch her favourite shows, and she's not being exposed to any wireless radiation whatsoever. Now, for bigger kids who that might not be sufficient, who kind of know how to find their newest, latest show and they need the internet, hardwire it.
Okay.
Wi-Fi's off. It's in flight mode, and you just need an adapter plugged into the Ethernet cable coming out of your modem, and then they can cruise the net without being exposed to high levels of wireless radiation.
And this would go for an Xbox as well, I assume, because they're another big EMF.
Yes, actually, yes. So PlayStations, Xboxes, wireless gaming consoles. I know the convenience of wireless is amazing, and sometimes for like games like the Wii, I don't even know if the Wii's a thing anymore, but you could play like tennis or bowling. You don't want something on a wire when you're trying to hit a golf ball. Again, it depends on... You have to be practical, and it depends on the overall exposure. If your kids only play on it like 20 minutes once a day, is that worth wiring? I mean, I probably still would, because I'm particular like that.
Yeah.
Once you've seen the literature, you just can't reconcile exposure at all. But there's a big difference between that and, say, someone, a teenage boy who plays, what is it, Warcraft, is that their thing, or Roblox, whatever it is, like for 8 hours on a Saturday and Sunday.
Yes.
That's a lot of wireless radiation, and I would not be okay with wireless headsets, wireless gaming consoles, if they're going to be committing that much time to doing that. So you have to kind of start with the big things. Get rid of the Wi-Fi and hardwire stuff, phones in flight mode unless you literally need to be on the move, and then you can kind of drill down to those things after that.
Okay, great. Now, can I just debunk a few things that I've heard that can protect us from the EMFs? And you can just give us your insight whether they're useful or not, because they do cost money. So you can get devices that you plug in, and they're supposed to block the Wi-Fi signals and the radiation to the exposure. And then there's things like your crystals, salt lamps, the filters, Epsom salt baths, and then also grounding. What's your thoughts on all those guys?
So, really, the only thing you have available is to reduce your exposure.
Okay.
Now, with exposure, we see an excess of positive ions build up in our body, and grounding can help to clear that. So getting your feet on the ground, in the sand, in the salt water, even running water, like washing your hands or having a shower, can help rebalance the ion balance. But again, it's a bit like smoking cigarettes and then popping a few antioxidants and thinking that that's kind of going to undo everything. No, it's like it helps, but it's not going to undo the damage, whereas the best thing you can do is reduce exposure. Now, we haven't touched on dirty electricity, which is high-frequency spikes from electric fields. There are plugins that you can use to reduce dirty electricity exposure, but they need to be installed and measured by a qualified EMF tech or building biologist, because some gadgets are not actually, certified for Australian use. And if you use the wrong thing, it can make it worse. It's, you've actually got to actually measure and test these things. But as far as plugging stuff in to ameliorate Wi-Fi, unless your Wi-Fi signal just completely disappears, it's not protecting you in any way, shape or form. It doesn't reduce your exposure to the wireless radiation at all. So they are a waste of money in that sense. Now, I know some of the marketing spiels around them are it generates like a healthy EMF frequency, or it strengthens your body's resilience against EMFs. trust me, I would like that to be true. And I do think one day we may have things that support our resilience. But right now, I've investigated almost every device there is, and they're garbage. And their so-called evidence, if you actually look at it, is garbage. And it just doesn't make sense to me to continue to poison yourself with something and then take something else to try and ameliorate poison when you can just simply stop taking the poison or reduce your exposure to it. You also have to look at it in the context of what type of EMF they're talking about. If something says it protects you from EMFs, then it's obviously garbage, because every type of EMF requires a different approach. So an electric field is different to a magnetic field, and is different to a radio frequency, and is different to artificial light. And so there isn't a one-stop shop that fixes anything. Now, I'll just touch on shungite. Shungite is the one type of crystal that does have properties whereby it can reflect wireless radiation. Doesn't help electric fields, doesn't help magnetic fields, doesn't help the other types of EMFs, but does with wireless radiation. But here's the thing, it's like a lead-lined wall to X-rays. Your dentist isn't going to wear a lead pendant on his neck and stand in front of the X-ray machine and think that that's going to help. He or she stands behind an entire wall. And so the only way shungite is going to reflect wireless radiation is if it's an entire wall between you and your modem or you and your phone. And then you won't get a signal and it doesn't work. So it's ridiculous. The other thing is, when you start with shielding, there are shielding fabrics, there are shielding products. If you don't know what you're doing, you can actually amplify the EMFs in your home and make it worse. And so you just don't want to go there with any of those things without professional instruments and input. So that's a hard no from me.
Okay, great. Thank you for debunking that, because, I mean, I've invested hundreds of dollars in these devices that I now know to remediate is less exposure. So thanks for going through them. Now, I know we're running out of time, and we were going to touch on, we didn't get to smart meters or dirty electricity, and that's okay. We'll have a chat another time. But can you just tell us a little bit about this EMF course you have coming out? Because I think our listeners might be very keen to get some more insight and information on how to protect ourselves and how to just find out if we are being exposed and if it's affecting our health.
Okay, so basically, in an ideal world, you'd get a building biologist to come to your house, or an electromagnetic field testing technician, and they would do an assessment on your home and actually test a few things, test some shielding, and then provide you a report on what to do for your personal circumstances. And look, the advantage of that is they can measure stuff that might be coming in from the neighbours or from up the road, across the road, things like cell phone towers, and you get advice very specifically for you. That being said, there is a cost for that. And if you're not in a major city, or even if you are, that you might not have one who can come to you. And so the other options are to get some online help where they can do kind of the bulk of it, but that's still kind of costly. Or you can do my course, EMF Proof Your Home. Now, it's going to sound like a heck of a plug, but essentially a lot of those practical things to reduce your exposure are applicable across the board to any household, no matter where you are in the world, actually, but if you're in Australia, of course. And so in this course, what I do is I'm teaching people what the different kinds of EMFs are, so that you have an understanding, because everyone just kind of hears the term EMFs and has kind of a very vague sense of what they are, but doesn't realise there's different types and the way that they actually show up, because you can't see them with a naked eye, and also how to address it. So I teach a little bit about that, because I want people to feel empowered in conversations with others and to really understand what it is they're working with. I then teach them about the health hazards associated with these different types of EMFs, because, lowering your exposure requires changes in habits, which can initially feel a little inconvenient sometimes. And so you really want to understand why you're doing it and the importance of doing it now and not later for health reasons. And then I give them practical checklists to go through the home and implement in a way that doesn't need any external support, so that they can lower their exposure by 95% in just 4 weeks. And that, I think, given it's a fraction of the cost to get a professional out, is a worthwhile investment, and at the very least is a good place to start. And even if you never got someone in, will just make the world of difference to you and your family's overall health levels.
That's so fantastic. And no, I definitely think it's important, because if someone's listening to this podcast, they might potentially be feeling very overwhelmed and going, you know, where do I go next? I can unplug and whatnot, but it's so important to be informed. These EMFs are invisible, and that is the biggest problem with them, I believe, is that we can't see them. We don't know our exposure. And so to find some good resources and information like your course so we can protect ourselves is going to be so valuable to the health of our families, to our patients if we're practitioners, and just to refer it on to as well. So thank you so much for, you know, creating such an amazing course. I'm certainly going to be doing it because it's so scary. You know, it's going to be like smoking. In 5 years from now, we're going to be seeing all these health implications coming out from EMF. So we didn't even touch on what EHS are or the dirty electricity. It's a huge topic. So if someone is feeling a little bit overwhelmed, then that's a great place to start. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure, Sandy. Thanks for the chat.
It's been great. Now, we didn't get to cover all our topics that we were going to dive into, so we're going to have you back another time. But thank you so much, Amie, for taking this time out to discuss with us and inform us about EMFs. It's been really good, and I've got a checklist to go and sort out myself now, and I hope our listeners can do the same. So thank you once again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sandy.
And because this topic is so big, we actually ran out of time, and there was a lot more we wanted to go into. However, we will get Amie back. But for now, if you'd like to check out some of her courses and resources, you can go to thatnaturopath.com and find all her information there. Thank you for listening. I have been a practitioner of naturopathic and Chinese medicine for over a decade. I have a master's degree of health science, and I am an academic lecturer at Australia's leading natural medicine college. I am available worldwide online for bookings. Simply go to sandyrothhealth.com.